Case 1. Megan Boswell, the mother who made a baby disappear. The story begins in Sullivan County, Tennessee, in the winter of 2019. It was a story that gripped the country, revealing a web of cold-blooded lies so calculated that detectives still struggle to make sense of it. Megan Boswell was only 18 when she gave birth to little Evelyn Mae Boswell on December 26, 2018. To the outside world, Megan seemed like any other young mom trying to raise her kid. She constantly uploaded photos of baby Evelyn, flaunting the chubby-cheeked infant online with loving captions about motherhood. But behind those happy pictures lay a dark truth. On February 18, 2020, Evelyn's grandfather finally reported the 15-month-old missing. He told police he had not seen his granddaughter since December of 2019, over 2 months prior. When detectives confronted Megan, she claimed Evelyn was staying with her father. Then her story shifted. The baby was with a friend. No, wait. She was with the father's mom. Actually, some stranger from a rehab center had her. The fabrications kept piling up, each one more ridiculous. Megan spun a web of lies, giving detectives at least 10 different versions of where her daughter was. She insisted she had handed Evelyn off to different people. She even claimed the baby was kidnapped. She pointed fingers at a local rehab facility, saying they took the child. But as detectives dug deeper, they found absolutely nothing lined up. Every contact she named had an alibi. Every single address she gave turned out empty. Meanwhile, critical time was ticking away. If the girl was still alive, she was in danger, surrounded by strangers. If she was gone, well, that was the horror police were starting to fear as they launched a massive search. Volunteers combed dense woods and searched abandoned buildings and dragged local rivers. The FBI joined the hunt, and Amber Alerts went nationwide. The community united in a desperate search for baby Evelyn. But her mother was not helping. She was actively hindering them. Police quickly realized the mother's behavior was beyond suspicious. She skipped scheduled interviews and refused to cooperate with the investigation. When she did talk, she gave contradictory tips that led to dead ends. She seemed far more obsessed with her public image than with finding her lost daughter. On February 24, 2020, police arrested Megan for filing a false report, but they knew this was just the start. They had to find Evelyn, and they had to shatter the mother's wall of lies to make it happen. The break came on March 6, 2020. A team searched property owned by a family member on Muddy Creek Road in Sullivan County. The vast acreage was rural, wooded, and isolated. While searching an outbuilding on the property, detectives stumbled upon something that made their dark fears a reality. Deep inside a shed, buried under trash and hidden beneath wood, they found the remains of baby Evelyn Mae Boswell. The 15-month-old had been there for months, tossed aside like trash while her mother played games and family members searched. An autopsy could not establish a clear cause of death due to decomposition, but her death was ruled a homicide. Evelyn had been dead since roughly mid-December of 2019, about the time family last saw her alive. Megan was promptly charged with first-degree murder, felony child abuse, and aggravated neglect, and tampering with evidence. The case against her was overwhelming. She had lied constantly about where her child was, and forensic evidence linked Evelyn's body directly to Megan. The trial exposed even more sickening details, with prosecutors arguing that Megan killed her child and spent months covering it up. She had moved the body several times, getting help from others who may not have known what they were truly assisting with. She kept posting on social media like normal, while her little baby decomposed in that dirty shed. Most chilling of all was her complete lack of remorse. Throughout the trial, she shed no tears for her dead child. She only cried when the focus turned to her. She was upset about getting caught, not that her baby was dead. On July 15, 2022, a jury convicted her of murder. On September 13, 2022, she was handed life in prison, plus 33 years. The judge ensured she would never be eligible for parole. She is set to spend her natural life behind bars. Today, she sits in the Tennessee prison for women. Only 25 years old, she is destined to die in that facility. No parole, no freedom. Today, little Evelyn would be 5 years old, probably starting kindergarten, learning to read, and making friends. Instead, she lies in a tiny grave, her young life stolen away by the very person who was supposed to protect her above all others. The tragedy of Evelyn Boswell shook Tennessee, sparking urgent debates about child welfare checks, missing kid protocols, and how rapidly police must act when a child goes missing. But no law or reform can ever bring back that precious 15-month-old baby girl. The case of Megan Boswell shows that evil does not always announce itself with rage or violence. Sometimes it hides behind a young mother, posting happy photos online while keeping terrible secrets. Next is Shanynthia Gardner, and a day of pure, unimaginable horror. This second tragic story unfolds in Memphis, Tennessee, on July 1st, 2016. On that hot Friday afternoon at the Hickory Hill Apartments, life seemed normal. Kids played outside while the oppressive summer heat hung heavy over the neighborhood. But inside apartment 7, 4 innocent siblings were about to lose their lives at the hands of the person they trusted most, their own mother. Shanynthia Gardner was 32, a mother of 4. Her daughters were 4-year-old Talon, 3-year-old Sa, and 2-year-old Savi. Her 6-month-old son, Yahtzee, was just learning to smile. From the outside, she seemed to cope well as a single mom, but family members later confessed they noticed warning signs. The events of that July day would go down as one of the darkest crimes in the history of Memphis. Around 3:30 in the afternoon, Shanynthia made a terrifying choice that stole 4 innocent lives and shattered many more. Armed with a large carving knife, she attacked her own children. 4-year-old Talon was stabbed repeatedly. 3-year-old Sa met the same fate, while 2-year-old Savi, too young to even understand, was killed by her mother. Even her 6-month-old baby, Yahtzee, who was still unable to walk, was stabbed to death. When deputies from the Shelby County Sheriff's Office arrived after a disturbance call, they encountered a horrific scene that would haunt them for the rest of their careers. All 4 kids were dead, their tiny bodies covered in deep knife wounds. Blood was everywhere, and Shanynthia stood there, drenched in red, still clutching the knife. Meanwhile, their father, Shannon Cook, was at work when he got the call that destroys every parent. He raced back to the apartment complex, only to face officers who had to deliver the unthinkable news. His 4 children were dead, slaughtered by their mother. The entire community shattered. How could any mother do this to her own babies? What could push a parent to commit such unspeakable violence? Those dark questions haunted Memphis as news of the massacre spread. Shanynthia was locked up and charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder. Prosecutors added 4 charges of aggravated child abuse and neglect to her indictment. The case was open and shut. Police caught her red-handed at the scene, covered in blood, still holding the weapon. But the trial dragged on for years, uncovering a messy reality of deep mental illness, domestic breakdown, and a system that failed to keep those 4 children safe. During the investigation, chilling details came to light. Relatives revealed that Shanynthia had been acting very strangely before the murders took place. She spoke wildly about religion and demons, completely paranoid and detached from the real world. Some family members knew she needed psychiatric help, but no one intervened. In court, her defense lawyers argued she was battling severe mental illness during the attacks. They insisted she went through a major psychotic break and could not comprehend her actions. Doctors evaluated her mind and confirmed she suffered from severe mental disorders. But the prosecution fought back with their own medical experts and proof. They claimed that, despite her illness, she knew precisely what she was doing when she took those lives. The planned nature of the killings, targeting 4 children with repeated stabbings, showed intent rather than pure psychosis. The trial was heartbreaking for everyone. Jurors were forced to view graphic photos of the 4 little victims, slaughtered in their beds. They heard tearful testimonies from the first responders who arrived on scene. They heard the grieving father describe the pure agony of losing his entire family in one afternoon. During the trial, Shanobia sat in near silence, whispering occasionally with her lawyers but showing zero reaction to the tragic evidence being laid out. To some observers, her coldness showed a total lack of remorse. Others wondered if she was still deeply detached from reality. Soon, the jury began their deliberations to decide her fate. On October 4th, 2022, over 6 years after the tragedy, a jury found Shanobia Gardner guilty on all counts. The courtroom erupted in raw emotion as the verdict was read. The children's father openly wept. Relatives clung to each other. Justice was finally served, but it would never bring back Talon, Shaya, Savi, and Yazi. At the sentencing, the judge showed absolutely no mercy. Gardner received 4 consecutive life sentences, 1 for each young life she took. She will not even be eligible for parole until she serves a minimum of 51 years. Since she was 32 at the time of the murders, she will be 83 years old before she can even be considered for release. Realistically, Shenobia Gardner will draw her last breath in prison, currently serving her time at the Tennessee Prison for Women. This is where she will spend the rest of her days. Forced to remember that horrific July afternoon, the pain of this case shattered an entire community. All of Memphis wept for 4 innocent lives cut far too short. Teachers fondly recalled Talon and Shaya as bright, highly energetic little girls. Neighbors remembered watching them play outside, their laughter echoing through the complex. And baby Yazi never even got to take his first steps or say his first words. Their devastated father, Shannon Cook, has been forced to rebuild his entire life after losing everything. In heartbreaking interviews, he has spoken of the impossible grief of burying 4 children all at once. He describes the endless nightmares, the years of therapy, and the struggle to find meaning in such senseless violence. 4 tiny caskets, 4 funeral programs, beautiful young lives, completely snuffed out by the very woman who gave them birth. This horrific case forces us to ask tough questions about mental health, parental fitness, and when the system should step in. Were there red flags that everyone missed? Could these children have been saved if someone had just taken her mental state seriously? Unfortunately, these questions will never have satisfying answers. What is absolutely certain is that 4 innocent kids are gone forever, and their mother will spend every remaining day paying for her crimes. Case number 3. Christa Pike, the only woman on Tennessee's death row. Not every dark case in this story involves mothers taking the lives of their own children. Some involve women whose crimes were so savage and depraved that they carved a permanent mark in the state's darkest history. Christa Gale Pike remains the only woman on Tennessee's death row. She's been sitting there since 1996, waiting for an execution that keeps being delayed. Make no mistake, her brutal actions against 19-year-old Colleen Slemmer easily solidify her place among the state's most sinister women. Our investigation takes us to the Job Corps Center in Knoxville, Tennessee, back in January of 1995. This federal program was designed to help young people get a solid education and learn valuable career skills. Students live on campus, take classes, and work toward a brighter future. Christa Pike was 18 years old when she first walked through these doors. She came from a deeply troubled home. Raised by an alcoholic mother, Christa bounced around between different homes throughout her chaotic childhood. The program seemed like the perfect chance to turn her life around. Instead, it became the backdrop for one of the most savage crimes in the state's history. Soon, Christa became romantically involved with another student there named Tedral Ship. Their relationship was toxic, volatile, and intense. Christa was consumed by jealousy, always terrified that Tedral was looking at other girls on campus. One of those women was 19-year-old Colleen Slemmer from Florida. Colleen was a quiet, shy girl simply trying to build a better future. She had absolutely no clue that Christa Pike viewed her as a mortal threat. In truth, there was absolutely nothing going on between Tedral and Colleen. They were merely classmates who exchanged casual words. But in Christa's twisted mind, Colleen was stealing her man, and that delusion would ultimately cost Colleen her life. On January 12, 1995, Christa and Tedral lured Colleen out to a dark, isolated patch of woods on campus. Christa had easily convinced her that they were just going to take a walk and clear the air. Colleen went along willingly, hoping to make peace with the jealous girl. Instead, she walked straight into a living nightmare. The moment they reached the secluded tree line, Christa Pike unleashed a brutal, unprovoked assault on Colleen. This was no sudden burst of passion. It was a prolonged, sadistic display of torture that went on for nearly 30 minutes. Christa battered Colleen with her bare fists and repeatedly smashed a jagged piece of asphalt into the young woman's skull. She carved a pentagram into Colleen's chest while the young woman was still alive. While Colleen begged, screamed for help, and struggled to break free, Christa kept up the assault with terrifying, relentless ferocity. Tedral Ship took part in the violence too, but investigators knew Christa was the driving force behind the entire tragedy. A third student named Shadala Peterson stood by, claiming she only acted as a lookout. The sheer level of violence was deeply disturbing. Coroners would later testify that Colleen suffered catastrophic skull fractures and severe brain injuries, along with over 100 cuts and bruises. The beating was so savage that fragments of her skull were recovered from the forest floor. Perhaps the most chilling detail came after Colleen died, when Christa Pike pocketed a fragment of her skull as a grim keepsake. She took a physical chunk of bone from her victim's shattered head and carried it away. The following day, Christa paraded the bone fragment in front of other classmates, boasting about the murder. She felt no regret, only cold indifference. Instead, she carried herself with pride. Having eliminated her perceived romantic rival, she wanted everyone to see how ruthless she could be. This reckless boasting led straight to her downfall. Terrified students who heard her graphic confessions quickly reported her to the police. During a search of her personal belongings, investigators discovered the missing piece of Colleen's skull. They also uncovered evidence showing that Christa had plotted the attack for days. The trial that followed was fast and devastating. Prosecutors presented an ironclad case of premeditated murder and extreme cruelty. The bone fragment was incriminating enough, but more horror awaited. Witnesses spoke of Christa's dangerous, obsessive jealousy, while forensic experts detailed the agonizing torture Colleen endured before she finally passed. Ultimately, Christa's own boasting and graphic confessions sealed her fate. On March 30th, 1996, Christa Gale Pike was found guilty of first-degree murder and conspiracy. Given the horrific brutality and clear planning of the slaying, the jury recommended the ultimate punishment of death. The judge agreed, sentencing her to die in the electric chair, though Tennessee later shifted its primary method to lethal injection. At just 20 years old, Christa became the youngest female offender sentenced to death row in modern American history. She also marked the first and only woman condemned to die in Tennessee since the state reinstated capital punishment. Tater Ruleship received life in prison with the possibility of parole after 25 years. Shadala Peterson received 6 years of probation after cooperating with state prosecutors. Yet Christa Pike has sat on death row for nearly 30 years, as her execution dates are continuously postponed. Constant appeals, legal maneuvers, and the grinding speed of capital cases have kept her alive long after her scheduled demise. Today, she is housed in the female death row unit at the Deborah K. Johnson Rehabilitation Center in Nashville. While her execution is set for September 2026, legal experts fully expect another last-minute delay. Over the years since her sentencing, Christa has repeatedly returned to the headlines. In 2012, surveillance footage caught her attempting to strangle another inmate with a shoelace. Though she claimed it was a plot to get transferred to a tighter facility, the brutal assault proved she remained highly dangerous behind bars. Colleen Slemmer's grieving family has endured over 30 years of endless appeals and delays. With every new court filing or motion, they are cruelly forced to relive the nightmare of their daughter's murder. Colleen was only 19 when her life was stolen. She had bright dreams, future goals, and a family who adored her. She had enrolled in Job Corps to build a promising future, only to run headfirst into absolute malice in Christa Pike. The horrific slaying stunned the entire country. The absolute savagery, paired with Christa's youth and total lack of empathy, left the public horrified. People wondered how an 18-year-old could possess such a capacity for cold, calculated violence. Evaluators who examined Christa's mind noted severe personality disorders rooted in a deeply troubled and abusive childhood. But ultimately, those dark background details cannot excuse what she did to Colleen Slemmer. They do not lessen the agony of that torture or the tragedy of Colleen's death. Christa Pike belongs among the most sinister figures in Tennessee history. She ended a young life in one of the most vicious ways imaginable, expressing zero remorse while maintaining her violent nature behind bars. Whether her execution is finally carried out or she dies of old age, one truth remains. Christa Gale Pike will never walk free again. Case 4 focuses on Brenda Dawn Bahunin, a mother who valued drugs over her child, taking us to Sullivan County in August of 2022. This case reveals how severe drug addiction, domestic violence, and utter neglect can combine to cause a tragedy ending in a child's death. Brenda Dawn Bahunin was a 35-year-old mother consumed by addiction. Her 3-year-old son, Joshua Jarnigan Jr., should have been happily playing with toys, watching cartoons, and enjoying a normal childhood. Instead, he was trapped in an environment of absolute neglect, where his safety was in constant danger. On August 6, 2022, emergency workers raced to a home in Blountville, Tennessee. When police arrived, they found 3-year-old Joshua cold and unresponsive. Paramedics fought to save him, but the little boy was pronounced dead. At first, Brenda claimed he had just stopped breathing. She insisted she had no idea what happened. One minute he was fine, the next he was gone. But as detectives processed the scene and questioned neighbors, a far darker reality began to take shape. The autopsy soon revealed that Joshua died from blunt force head trauma. This was no tragic illness or sudden natural death. Someone had struck the 3-year-old with enough force to end his life. As investigators dug deeper, they uncovered a terrible history of abuse. Neighbors recalled seeing little Joshua with cuts, heavy bruises, and other injuries on several occasions. Brenda's heavy drug habits were no secret. The home where the toddler lived was filthy, scattered with drug needles and hazard after hazard. Investigators learned that Brenda was living with a man who was also deeply trapped in severe drug addiction. Both adults in the house were actively abusing methamphetamine and other hard drugs. Little Joshua was practically raising himself in a chaotic household defined by constant violence and drug abuse. On the very day Joshua died, someone struck him in the head with devastating force. Medical examiners concluded that the fatal injury matched a heavy blow delivered by an adult. The blow triggered fatal brain swelling that killed the 3-year-old. Brenda initially denied hurting her son, but the evidence mounting against her was undeniable. She faced charges of first-degree murder, aggravated child abuse, and severe child neglect. As the case developed, child welfare records surfaced, showing previous warnings about the boy's safety. Multiple reports had already been filed with Child Protective Services. Social workers had investigated, yet Joshua remained in Brenda's custody until it was too late. The trial exposed devastating details of his life. Neighbors and local educators testified that the boy was frequently dirty, hungry, and dressed in rags. He bore clear marks of physical abuse and would beg neighbors for scraps of food. The adults who should have protected him failed him completely. Prosecutors argued that Brenda's severe addiction turned her into an unfit mother who valued drugs over her child's life. They presented evidence showing she knew her son was suffering brutal abuse, yet did absolutely nothing to intervene. On the day he died, Brenda was high on drugs, either delivering the fatal blow herself or letting someone else do it. The defense tried to paint Brenda as a victim herself, pointing to domestic violence, crippling addiction, and deep poverty. They argued she never meant to kill her son, framing the tragedy as an accident born from a chaotic, drug-addled environment. But the jury did not believe it. On December 7, 2022, Brenda Dawn Behunin was convicted of first-degree murder for killing her 3-year-old son. At her sentencing, the judge handed down a severe but just punishment, giving Brenda life in prison without parole. She would never walk free again, and the judge's final remarks in court carried immense weight. He noted that Brenda was blessed with the precious gift of a child, but failed entirely to protect him. She chose illegal drugs over her own son, and permitted horrific abuse to continue. And ultimately, through her act of cruelty or her failure to act, she caused Joshua's death. Today, Brenda Dawn Behunin is serving her life sentence at the Tennessee Prison for Women. She is 37 years old. She will spend the next 40 or 50 years, if she lives that long, reflecting on her failure. Joshua Jarnigan Jr. was only 3 when he died. He never got to start school, never rode a bike, and never reached any of childhood's milestone moments. His short life was defined entirely by neglect, abuse, and constant fear. The tragedy sparked heated debates in Tennessee over child welfare and parental drug addiction. How many chances should negligent parents get when a child's safety is on the line? At what point must authorities remove children from homes shattered by drug addiction? Could Joshua have been saved by aggressive intervention? These are painful, difficult questions with no easy answers. One thing is certain: the welfare system failed Joshua, and his mother failed him in the worst way imaginable. The deepest tragedy of Joshua's death lies in how incredibly easy it would have been to prevent. If only Brenda had sought help for her addiction, walked away from that abusive relationship, and valued her son's safety over her next high, Joshua would still be alive today. Instead, he lies in a tiny grave. Just another child lost to parental neglect and heavy drug abuse. And his mother will spend her remaining days locked in a cold prison cell, right where she belongs. Case 5. Shannon Elliott, the babysitter who turned killer. Our fifth story takes us to Fayetteville, Tennessee, in March of 2023. This case serves as a dark reminder that child predators are not always biological mothers. Often, they are the very caregivers trusted to protect other people's children. Shannon Elliott was a 37-year-old running a home daycare in Fayetteville, trusted by local parents to watch their kids during the workday. Families believed their children were entirely safe in her care. They were wrong. 5-year-old Turner Simpkins was a bright, energetic boy who loved dinosaurs and playing outdoors. His hardworking parents needed child care, and Elliott's home daycare seemed like an ideal fit. Turner began attending regularly, and at first, everything seemed fine. But on March 28, 2023, his parents received the call every parent dreads. Turner had been severely injured while in Elliott's care and was being rushed directly to the hospital. They had to get there immediately. Once Turner arrived, doctors uncovered horrific, extensive trauma that a simple accident could never explain. The 5-year-old child had suffered severe blunt force trauma to his head and body. His injuries were consistent with a brutal beating, and despite the doctor's desperate efforts, the damage was simply too severe to survive. Turner Simpkins died on March 29, 2023, only one day after the tragedy at Shannon's daycare. Detectives immediately launched an investigation into the suspicious death. Shannon claimed Turner fell and hit his head. She insisted she tried to help, framing the boy's severe injuries as nothing more than a tragic, unforeseen accident. But the autopsy and medical evidence told a different story, showing injuries entirely inconsistent with a typical playground fall. The young boy had been struck repeatedly with immense force. Crucial bruising pointed to ongoing, long-term physical abuse, not a single mishap. This was clearly no accident. When detectives interviewed other children from the daycare, a dark pattern emerged as several confessed they were terrified of Shannon. Some recalled being screamed at or handled roughly, prompting other parents to finally bring forward worries they had previously ignored. Red flags like sudden daycare anxiety, unexplained bruises, and drastic personality changes now made sense. The police investigation quickly revealed that Shannon Elliott had a long history of mistreating the children under her supervision. Armed with a short temper, she would routinely lash out physically whenever a child misbehaved or irritated her. On the day Turner was fatally injured, evidence suggests he triggered Shannon's anger, perhaps by simply being loud or refusing to listen. Or maybe he had an accident. Whatever it was, Shannon responded by beating a 5-year-old boy so viciously that he died. Police arrested Shannon, charging her with first-degree murder and aggravated child abuse. Along with aggravated neglect, these charges mirrored her brutality. This was far worse than a temporary lapse in judgment. She had inflicted lethal injuries on a completely healthy 5-year-old child. The trial brought immense agony for Turner's family as they sat through grueling medical details describing their son's extensive injuries. They were forced to view his battered body. They had to face the crushing reality that the caregiver they trusted had murdered their boy, while prosecutors laid out overwhelming evidence of her intentional, fatal violence. The medical testimony was undeniable. Statements from other children and parents clearly proved her history of abusive behavior. Her own shifting, contradictory alibis only solidified her guilt, even as the defense desperately claimed she never intended to kill the child. They argued she was merely disciplining the boy and things went too far, but that excuse fell flat in court. A person does not accidentally beat a child to death. The sheer violence used was entirely incompatible with simple discipline. It was pure, unadulterated violence. On November 14, 2023, the jury found Shannon Elliott guilty of first-degree murder. At her sentencing in January of 2024, the judge handed down a life sentence. She will not be eligible for parole until she has served at least 51 years. Since she was 37 at the time of the murder, she will be 88 before she can even seek release. In reality, Shannon Elliott will surely die in prison. Currently locked up at the Tennessee Prison for Women, she will spend decades contemplating the 5-year-old boy she brutally killed. His grieving family faces an unbearable void. Turner should be in first grade today, learning to read, playing soccer, and making friends. Instead, his parents must visit the cemetery where their 5-year-old boy is buried. The horrific case sent shockwaves through Fayetteville, leaving local parents who used her services absolutely terrified of what they narrowly escaped. They looked at their own children, wondering how close they came to a similar tragedy. Nearby daycare providers quickly felt the pressure as worried parents grew far more cautious about who they trusted with their children. The case raised serious questions about daycare safety laws and oversight. Shannon ran a small home daycare, a setup with far fewer state rules in Tennessee than larger commercial facilities. Were there missed red flags? Should these home daycares face much stricter and more frequent surprise inspections? But in the end, no amount of red tape can stop someone who simply should never be near children. Shannon Elliott was trusted with the lives of helpless young children, and she betrayed that trust in the most horrific way. Turner Simpkins was only 5 years old, with his entire future ahead of him. Instead, his life was stolen by the very person paid to protect him. As for Shannon Elliott, she will never walk free again, delivering the exact justice Turner's grieving family had prayed for. A court verdict cannot bring little Turner back, but it guarantees Shannon will never harm another innocent child. Case number 6, Annette Harvey, where friendship ended in murder. This dark investigation leads to Memphis, Tennessee in June of 2021. Though this case does not involve a mother killing her child, it exposes a capacity for cold-blooded violence that easily earned Annette Harvey a spot among the state's most dangerous women. Annette Harvey was a 42-year-old Memphis resident when she pulled off a crime that left the entire city in shock. Her victim was Robin Leonard, a woman who viewed Annette as a trusted friend. The facts here are especially haunting because of the ultimate betrayal. Robin Leonard placed complete trust in Annette. They shared a history, common friends, and a seemingly warm relationship. Robin had absolutely no clue that Annette was actively plotting her execution. On June 5, 2021, searchers discovered Robin Leonard's body in Memphis. She had been shot several times. The crime scene pointed to a calculated, pre-planned ambush, not a random street attack or a sudden crime of passion. Police quickly turned their attention to Annette Harvey. Key evidence placed her right at the scene when the shooting occurred. Witnesses saw both women together just moments before the gunfire, and physical evidence directly connected Annette to the murder. As investigators peeled back the layers of their relationship, they uncovered a classic motive: financial gain. Bank records indicated that Annette was set to profit off Robin's death, even if the financial trail itself was highly tangled. What made this homicide so deeply unsettling was the extensive planning behind it. This was not a sudden burst of rage or an argument that spun out of control. Annette carefully mapped out the attack, bided her time, and carried it out with ruthless efficiency. Later, the courtroom trial exposed the true nature of their friendship. State prosecutors argued that Annette built this friendship purely to gain access to Robin and her personal assets. She spent months earning Robin's trust, pretending to be a loyal companion while actively plotting her demise the entire time. The state's case was overwhelming. Forensic ballistics directly linked the murder weapon back to Annette. Cell phone tracking data also locked her at the scene. Bank records provided a clear motive, while multiple witnesses highlighted the glaring lies in Annette's interviews with police. Most damning of all was how Annette acted afterward. Instead of grieving her friend, she focused entirely on covering her tracks. She cooked up fake alibis. She tried pointing fingers at other suspects, showing a complete lack of remorse for executing her supposed friend. Her defense team tried hard to spark reasonable doubt, suggesting other people had reasons to want Robin dead. They attacked witness credibility and challenged the forensic reports, but the state's case was simply too airtight to break. On March 18, 2022, Annette Harvey was found guilty of first-degree murder. The jury took less than a day to decide. At the sentencing hearing, the judge handed down a life sentence with parole eligibility only after 51 years. Since Annette was 42 during the crime, she will be 93 years old before she ever gets a chance at freedom. For all practical purposes, Annette Harvey is going to die behind cold steel bars. She is currently locked away at the Tennessee Prison for Women, where she is set to stay for decades. Robin Leonard's family must cope not only with their sudden grief, but with the brutal sting of betrayal. Robin truly believed Annette was her friend. She trusted her completely, never dreaming that the person she welcomed into her home was actively designing her death. It remains a chilling reminder that sometimes the absolute most dangerous predators are the ones we let closest to us. Annette did not target a stranger or snap in a moment of rage. She methodically planned to assassinate a woman who trusted her. Though Annette Harvey's methods differ from other killers on this list, her actions expose the very same capacity for cold-blooded violence and total lack of empathy. She took a life for her own gain, showed zero remorse, and tried to flee justice. Today, Robin Leonard's family is still left grieving. They have had to rebuild their lives around a void that never should have existed. Meanwhile, Annette Harvey sits in a prison cell, destined to remain there until she dies. Case 7. Natasha Cornett, the teen who led a murderous spree. This 7th case takes us back to April of 1997 to one of the most shocking crimes in Tennessee history, the Lilliette family murders. At the center of this case was 18-year-old Natasha Cornett, a troubled teen who masterminded a crime so senseless and brutal it still haunts investigators nearly 30 years later. Natasha Cornett grew up in Kentucky, raised in a deeply dysfunctional household. By her teens, she was experimenting with drugs, running with dangerous crowds, and developing a dark, twisted worldview. She adopted a self-styled Satanist persona, covered herself in disturbing tattoos, and fell in with other deeply troubled teens. In April of 1997, Natasha and 5 other teenagers decided to run away. The group included Tedderl Shipp, the very same Tedderl from the Christa Pike case, who was later sent to adult prison after that conviction. Along with Edward Mullins, Joseph Reisner, Jason Bryant, and Karen Howell, they piled into a car, aiming for New Orleans with only vague plans. With no money and no real plan, they possessed a terrifying willingness to do whatever it took to keep moving forward. On April 6, 1997, the runaways pulled into a rest area on Interstate 75 in Greene County, Tennessee, near Baileyton. Also resting at that very stop was the unsuspecting Lilibeth family. Vidar Lilibeth, age 34, his wife Delphina, 35, their 6-year-old daughter Tabitha, and Delphina's mother Cora, 57. As Jehovah's Witnesses returning from a religious event, the Lilibeths were a kind, peaceful family who believed in helping others. When they crossed paths with the teenagers at that rest stop, they had no idea they were walking directly into pure evil. What followed was a tragedy so shockingly senseless that investigators still struggle to explain it today. Natasha and her followers decided to carjack the Lilibeth family's van, but instead of simply taking the vehicle and leaving, they forced the entire family into the van at gunpoint. They drove the Lilibeths to a secluded area off Interstate 75, where, in a scene of absolute horror, they shot all 4 members execution style. 6-year-old Tabitha was shot in the head and eyes, while her mother, Delphina, was shot multiple times. Her father, Vidar, was shot repeatedly, and her grandmother, Cora, was also struck multiple times. Leaving them in a muddy ditch, the shooters believed all 4 were dead. Yet miraculously, 2 of them survived the initial onslaught. Vidar Lililid, despite sustaining multiple gunshot wounds, was still breathing when help finally arrived. 6-year-old Tabitha, though shot in the head, was clinging to life, while Vidar survived long enough to tell police what happened. He managed to describe the teenagers who had carjacked them, offering crucial details to help track down the killers. Tragically, Vidar soon succumbed to his injuries, leaving behind only his severely wounded young daughter. Tabitha Lililid became an enduring symbol of resilience throughout this entire case. Despite being shot in the head and eyes, the 6-year-old survived, enduring months of grueling surgeries that ultimately left her blind. Yet she survived, the sole member of her immediate family to make it out alive. Meanwhile, Delphina Lililid and her mother, Cora Kunzla, died right there. 3 family members were gone, leaving young Tabitha blind and orphaned. Law enforcement moved quickly to identify and arrest Natasha and her pack. Driving the stolen van made them easy to track, and when caught, they showed a chilling indifference to their monstrous actions. Some laughed, others openly treated the horrific crime as an exciting adventure. In the interrogation room, the teens quickly turned on each other, desperately trying to pin the blame on someone else. But the physical evidence proved that multiple teens had fired shots. This was no single rogue gunman. It was a joint execution of an innocent family, and as their oldest, de facto leader, Natasha Cornett faced the heaviest charges. She faced 3 counts of first-degree murder for the deaths of Vidar, Delphina, and Cora, along with attempted murder for the attack on Tabitha. Their trial exposed a truly sickening collective mindset. They had slaughtered the Lilalid family not out of necessity, but apparently for sheer amusement. Obsessed with Satanism and violence, they openly spoke about wanting to kill someone, and when they spotted a vulnerable family, they seized their chance. A few members were minors when the crime occurred and ultimately received lighter sentences. But at 18, Natasha was tried as an adult. On April 8, 1998, just over a year after the carnage, Natasha Cornett was convicted on all counts. The judge handed down life without parole. Today, Natasha Cornett is 46 years old, having spent more than half her life behind bars. Locked away at the Tennessee Prison for Women, she will stay there until her final breath. No parole, no release, no second chances. She is destined to die behind bars. Meanwhile, her accomplices received various sentences. Several of them are also serving life without parole. The rest face decades inside cold cells. Yet for the Lilalid family, justice cannot resurrect the dead. Tabitha Lilalid, the sole survivor, was taken in by relatives, fighting to rebuild her broken life despite severe trauma and permanent physical disabilities. She has spoken openly of healing and forgiveness, showing a profound grace that contrasts sharply with the cruelty of her attackers. The Lilalid massacre deeply shook Tennessee and the nation. How could 6 teenagers commit such senseless brutality? What dark urge drives people to slaughter total strangers for no reason? Psychiatrists examining the teenagers uncovered a highly toxic cocktail of psychological triggers: broken homes, heavy drug abuse, mental illness, and a mob mentality that fueled escalating violence. Yet absolutely none of this excuses their savagery. Natasha Cornett might not have murdered her own offspring, but she masterminded the slaughter of another mother's child, 6-year-old Tabitha, who survived by a miracle. She shattered a family, leaving a blind, orphaned little girl. The Little case remains one of Tennessee's most infamous atrocities. Criminologists study it as a prime example of pack violence and adolescent killers. It is heavily debated in papers on juvenile justice and capital punishment, and it remains etched in the minds of everyone who remembers the sheer horror of a family slaughtered at a rest stop by teenage predators. Natasha Cornett will never taste freedom again. She will rot in a cage for the rest of her days, the only fitting place for someone who took part in such mindless savagery. Case 8. Patricia Jones and the brutal slaying of an elderly woman. This next tragedy brings us to Knox County, Tennessee, in December of 1994. This case exposes the sheer, heartless cruelty of crimes targeting senior citizens, defenseless victims who are often the most vulnerable targets in society. Patricia Jones participated in the savage slaying of 84-year-old Alberta Coker, a grandmother, who deserved to spend her final years in peace and safety. Instead, she fell prey to a crime so barbaric, it left even hardened detectives completely shaken. On December 14, 1994, police rushed to Alberta Coker's Knoxville home, only to discover a scene of pure, unadulterated horror. The 84-year-old grandmother had been battered to death in her sanctuary. The sheer savagery was off the charts. Alberta was bludgeoned repeatedly with heavy objects, leaving horrific injuries. The blood-spattered walls made it clear this was no simple robbery gone wrong. This was a prolonged, merciless assault on a defenseless elderly woman. Alberta fought desperately for her life, but at 84, she stood no chance against her ruthless attackers. Detectives immediately zeroed in on Patricia Jones. Forensic evidence put her inside the house, and witnesses tied her directly to the slaying. As investigators reconstructed the crime, they realized that Patricia and an accomplice had deliberately targeted Alberta's home. Their ultimate motive was greed, cold-blooded robbery. Alberta was rumored to keep cash inside her house, and the killers figured they could easily overpower a grandmother and grab the money. What they did not care about was the lethal level of violence they would unleash during the heist. During the vicious onslaught, Alberta Coker was battered so mercilessly that she succumbed to her horrific injuries. After tearing the house apart, they fled with a handful of valuables, leaving Alberta's lifeless body on the floor. Evidence proved Patricia knew exactly who Alberta was and had plotted the robbery. This was no spur-of-the-moment mistake. Patricia had deliberately preyed on a fragile senior citizen, knowing she would be completely defenseless. Police arrested Patricia Jones, charging her with first-degree murder and aggravated robbery. The case against her was virtually ironclad. Physical evidence locked her directly to the bloody scene. Witnesses spotted her lurking near the home around the time of the slaying, and she was caught holding the victim's stolen belongings. The courtroom grew incredibly tense. Alberta's devastated family took the stand, describing a beautiful soul and a deeply devoted grandmother, a pillar of her neighborhood who had worked hard all her life and earned the right to grow old in safety. The state portrayed Patricia as a cold, predatory criminal who purposely hunted the most helpless members of society. Prosecutors argued that she targeted Alberta specifically, preying on her advanced age and vulnerability. Such savage violence, unleashed on an 84-year-old woman, showed a complete, terrifying lack of humanity. Her lawyers tried to downplay her role, claiming she was barely involved. But the cold, hard evidence told a very different story. On September 12, 1995, Patricia Jones was found guilty of first-degree murder and aggravated robbery. At sentencing, the judge handed down a crushing punishment, matching the crime life in prison plus 40 years. She would have to finish her life sentence before even starting that 40-year stretch. Essentially, she was never going to walk out of prison alive. Today, she remains locked up at the Tennessee Prison for Women, where she has spent nearly 30 years. Alberta Coker was 84 when her life was taken. She had survived the Great Depression, World War II, the Civil Rights Movement, and decades of history. This grandmother raised a family, worked hard, and earned the right to spend her final years in peace and safety. Instead, she was savagely murdered right inside her home by a predator who saw her as easy prey. The tragic case highlighted how vulnerable the elderly are, exposing the urgent need to protect senior citizens. Because of this vulnerability, crimes targeting seniors often carry much tougher, enhanced penalties, and Patricia's life sentence reflected that exact standard. Alberta's family has to live with the agonizing knowledge that their beloved grandmother died in terror, targeted by a predator who chose her because she was old. No passage of time can heal that deep wound, though they find some peace knowing Patricia will never walk free to hurt anyone else again. She may not have taken a child's life, but she stole someone's beloved grandmother. A woman who lived a full life and deserved far better than an end, filled with terror and violence. For her crime, she will spend her remaining days behind bars, exactly where she belongs. Next, Case 9, Vanessa Coleman, the woman who helped unleash a living nightmare. This next case stands as one of the most deeply disturbing crimes in Tennessee history. The torture and murder of Channon Christian and Christopher Newsom in Knoxville in January of 2007. Though Vanessa Coleman did not personally strike every blow, her active help and facilitation made her a key player in this monstrous story. The sheer level of brutality makes these details incredibly difficult to discuss. Yet we must look at the full scope of what happened to understand why Coleman earned her place on this list. On the night of January 6, 2007, 21-year-old Channon Christian and her boyfriend, 23-year-old Christopher Newsom, were on a date in Knoxville when they were carjacked by a gang that included 18-year-old Vanessa Coleman. What followed was a prolonged nightmare of torture, assault, and murder that dragged on for hours. The attackers dragged Christopher to a nearby railway track, where they beat, assaulted, and shot him multiple times. They then set his body on fire. He was only 23. Meanwhile, Channon's ordeal was about to get even worse. Held captive inside a nearby house for hours, she was repeatedly assaulted by several members of the group. They beat her mercilessly, torturing her in ways far too graphic and cruel to describe here. In the end, she was murdered, and her body was shoved into a plastic garbage bin. It was easily one of the most horrific crime scenes Knoxville investigators had ever laid eyes on. The sheer savagery, the brutal assaults, and the signs of extended torture created a nightmare that would haunt investigators for the rest of their lives. Vanessa was the sole woman in the group, surrounded by Lamaricus Davidson, Latalvis Cobbins, George Thomas, and Eric Boyd. And though she did not deal every blow, her role was absolutely vital. Crucial evidence proved she was right there in the house during most of the horrific abuse. She had multiple chances to save the young woman, call for help, or stop the madness. Instead, she joined in and later covered it up. Specifically, a jury convicted Vanessa of facilitating the brutal assault and murder of Channon Christian. Court testimony proved she was right there in the house while Channon was being tortured. She actively cleaned up crime scene evidence afterward, showing zero remorse or pity for the young couple. At trial, prosecutors argued her gender was no excuse. In fact, they said it made her complete inaction even more monstrous. As a young woman herself, she stood by and watched another woman get tortured and abused, refusing to do a single thing. Her defense team tried to frame her as a victim too, arguing she feared the male attackers and acted purely out of terror. But the facts painted a different picture. She had plenty of chances to escape or alert the police, yet she did absolutely nothing. On May 11, 2010, a jury convicted Vanessa Coleman of facilitating aggravated kidnapping, rape, and other horrific charges. She was initially sentenced to 53 years behind bars, but in 2011, her conviction was overturned because of a biased judge. Retried in 2012, she was found guilty once more. This time, she received 35 years. Thanks to credit for time served, she becomes eligible for parole in 2030. Yet, when she first faced the parole board, they rejected her. Board members pointed to the sheer brutality of her crimes and her total lack of remorse. Today, Vanessa Coleman serves her time at the Tennessee Prison for Women. Though her sentence is not technically life without parole, the reality is she will likely spend decades more behind these walls. Even if she walks free as an elderly woman, the prime years of her life are already gone. The slayings of Channon Christian and Christopher Newsom completely shocked the entire nation. They were young, innocent souls with bright futures. Ever since, their families have endured a never-ending cycle of trials, appeals, and hearings, forced to relive the nightmare over and over. Channon's mother often speaks of her daughter, a vibrant, caring young woman who is studying to become a teacher. Christopher's family remembers a kind-hearted young man who loved working on cars and hanging out with his friends. Both had so much life left to live. The tragedy ignited fierce national debates about race and crime, since the victims were white and the killers black. Many criticized mainstream media, claiming they ignored the story on a national level. Others warned against turning a human tragedy into a political weapon. Yet, beyond all the noise, one central truth remains. 2 innocent souls were tortured and killed, and Vanessa Coleman helped make it happen. Although Vanessa might walk free one day, unlike the other women on this list, she will carry the heavy weight of her choices forever. She could have been a hero, she could have saved Channon Christian, or simply called the police. Instead, she chose to stay silent, helping execute one of Tennessee's most horrific crimes. Case 10. Caitlin Matthews, the bathtub murder that shook Tennessee. Now, let's look at our final, highly unusual case. Though Caitlin Matthews was initially found guilty and sentenced to life in prison, her conviction was thrown out because of poor legal defense. Still, the details are so deeply disturbing we had to include it in our look at Tennessee's worst maternal crimes. In February of 2014, 4-year-old Kirsten Hagland was found dead in a bathtub in Dixon, Tennessee. The scene immediately raised red flags for police, and they quickly focused on Caitlin Metz, the mother's girlfriend who was babysitting little Kirsten. 26-year-old Caitlin Metz was living with and dating Kirsten's mother. On that tragic day, she was tasked with watching the 4-year-old while the mother was at work. Caitlin originally told police that the child had drowned during a horrific, unpredictable accident in the bath. She claimed she only left the 4-year-old alone for a brief second, but when she returned, Kirsten was submerged and cold. Instantly, investigators doubted her story. Autopsy results showed injuries that just did not match a simple drowning. The little girl had deep bruises and other trauma. The suspect's timeline completely clashed with physical evidence, and witnesses recalled her acting incredibly strange before the incident. As detectives dug deeper, a sinister truth began to surface. The evidence pointed to something horrific. Caitlin had actively held the 4-year-old underwater to drown her. It was not a tragic accident, it was murder. Police soon uncovered a deeply toxic household dynamic. Caitlin reportedly resented the little girl, viewing her as an annoying obstacle to her relationship with the mother. Loved ones had noticed severe tension building between Caitlin and the child. Some suspected she had been physically rough with Kirsten before. On the day of the killing, something finally set off her rage. Perhaps the child misbehaved, or was simply too loud, begging for some attention. Whatever it was, Caitlin made a monstrous choice. She filled the tub, forced Kirsten inside, and held her underwater until the little girl stopped breathing. Kirsten surely fought back, gasping for air and feeling absolute terror as she died. Cruelly, the one ending her life was the very person trusted to keep her safe. Once the child went limp, Caitlin tried staging the scene as an accident and dialed 911. She claimed she had only stepped away for a brief moment, playing the part of a devastated caregiver who made a tragic mistake. But detectives did not believe her tale, and the evidence supported their suspicions. Soon, Caitlin Metz was arrested, facing charges of first-degree murder, aggravated child abuse, and neglect. The prosecution had a rock-solid case. Autopsy findings shattered her claims of an accident, and witnesses testified about the tense relationship between Caitlin and Kirsten. Even the forensic analysis of the bathroom raised deep questions about Caitlin's official account. In 2017, Caitlin Metz was convicted of first-degree murder for killing 4-year-old Kirsten Hagland. The judge handed her a life sentence with absolutely no hope of parole. For several years, it seemed certain that Caitlin would spend her remaining days locked away, just like the other women on this list. The family found some peace in the verdict, though it could never restore their sweet 4-year-old. Then, in 2021, Caitlin's conviction was suddenly overturned. An appeals court ruled that Caitlin received terrible representation from her defense attorney. Serious issues plagued her defense strategy, alongside critical procedural errors, and doubts lingered over whether she got a fair trial. Although not declaring her innocent, the court granted a new trial with proper legal representation. This shocking update devastated Kirsten's family. After years of believing that justice was finally served, they suddenly face another grueling trial, forced to relive every horrific detail of Kirsten's tragic drowning. Today, Caitlin Metzger's case hangs in legal limbo. She could face another jury, or the state might offer a plea deal. The final outcome remains uncertain. Only one truth remains: 4-year-old Kirsten Hagland is dead, and Caitlin Metzger was supposed to be protecting her. No matter her final sentence, the heartbreaking reality of this loss never fades. Little Kirsten was only 4 years old. She loved to play with dolls, watch cartoons, and cuddle close to her mother. Today, she should be 14, navigating middle school and figuring out exactly who she wants to become. Instead, she rests in a quiet grave, her life stolen away in a bathtub by the person trusted to protect her. This case belongs on our list, not because she is currently serving out a life term. In fact, she is free for now, but her actions mirror the exact maternal betrayal that links every story on this list. A vulnerable child was left in her care, only to perish under dark, suspicious circumstances that a jury ruled as murder. The courts might give Caitlin Metzger another chance to defend herself, but no legal ruling can change what happened to Kirsten Hagland on that dark February day in 2014. We have now traced 10 of the most chilling cases in Tennessee's dark criminal history. 10 women who shattered the most sacred human bond, the promise that a mother will protect her children. Monsters like Megan Boswell, who hid her baby's body in a shed and lied for months as it slowly decomposed. Cynthia Gardner, who systematically slaughtered all 4 of her young children in a single afternoon of pure horror. Or Christa Pike, who tortured and murdered a classmate, keeping a piece of her skull as a trophy. Brenda Dawn Bionen, who chose a drug habit over her 3-year-old son, letting him be beaten to death. Shannon Elliott, whose brutal beatings left 5-year-old Turner Simpkins dead from his severe internal injuries. Annette Harvey, who murdered her friend Robin Leonard in a cold-blooded act of betrayal. Natasha Cornett, who orchestrated the slaughter of the Lillowette family, including 6-year-old Tabitha. Patricia Jones, who beat 84-year-old Alberta Coker to death inside her home. And Vanessa Coleman, who helped torture and murder Shannon Christian and Christopher Newsom. Finally, Caitlin Maths, whose case proves that legal outcomes remain incredibly complicated, even when the underlying tragedy is undeniable. These killers came from very different backgrounds, facing unique circumstances and driven by different motives. Some were broken by mental illness, others by greed, jealousy, or pure cruelty. A few targeted their own flesh and blood. Others killed strangers, but they all share a single terrifying thread: They crossed a dark boundary that can never be undone, taking innocent lives and leaving a trail of trauma that will echo for generations. The majority of these women will never taste freedom again. They are destined to die behind bars, old and forgotten, remembered only by the horrors they committed. A couple might eventually walk free as elderly women, but they will carry that crushing weight forever. Their victims, however, remain eternally frozen in time. Baby Evelyn will forever remain 15 months old. The 4 Gardner children will never get to grow up, and Turner Simpkins will forever be a 5-year-old who loved dinosaurs. Colleen Slemmer, Shannon Christian, Christopher Newsom, Alberta Coker, Robin Leonard, and the Lillowit family, their lives cut short, gone forever. These cases force a confrontation with the darkest truths of human nature. They prove that evil rarely announces itself with obvious warning signs. Instead, it slips behind a mother's smile, a caregiver's quiet reassurance, or a trusted friend's companionship. These tragedies also highlight the desperate need for vigilance. How many victims could have survived if someone had noticed the red flags? If a worried neighbor had called police? If a family member had demanded an intervention? No one can change what happened in these 10 cases, but society must learn from them. That means watching closely when children fear their guardians and reporting abuse instead of hoping someone else steps up. It means supporting the groups fighting to shield children and vulnerable people from harm. Above all, it means remembering the victims not as cold statistics, but as real souls whose lives mattered and whose fates demand remembrance. This ends another dark investigation on Cold Case Time. If these stories left an impact, please hit like and share your thoughts below. Subscribe and enable notifications to never miss another deep look at cases that shook the justice system. Share this video with other true crime followers, but always stay mindful of the sensitive nature of these devastating real-life tragedies. Drop a comment about which case felt most haunting and if the modern legal system does enough to protect children. Until the next story, stay vigilant, stay safe, and remember, delayed justice is not always denied. Sometimes, it's just the painful beginning of a lifetime behind bars. This was Cold Case Time. Thanks for joining this grim journey through some of Tennessee's darkest moments.